This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FY Investment Group and your host of Washington Current Review, where we interview leading voices from business and politics that impact you, the viewer. Today, our guest is Alyssa Ayers. Nice to see you, and it's nice to thank you for coming.
Thank you for the invitation. Happy to join.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are.
Who I am. My name is Alyssa Ayers. I am Senior Fellow for India, Pakistan, and South Asia at the Council on Foreign Relations, based here in Washington, D.C. So I work on U.S. foreign policy towards the South Asia region. I've just come out with a new book, which I'm very happy about. I brought you a copy.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. And this is called CFR, correct?
Yes, exactly.
And before that, you were Deputy Assistant Secretary.
That's exactly right. I served in the State Department when former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was Secretary. I was our Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia.
Very good. So, talk about the book. So, tell us a little bit about this book and why did you write this book?
This is your copy, which I will present to you when we are done with this. This is a book about India's rise on the world stage.
Is India risen and India still rising?
In many ways, India has risen, and that's part of the argument that I make. But I do think we're seeing a transition in India where people are becoming more expeditionary. We see a focus on a more expeditionary military across the Indian Ocean. We see a focus on stepping up on the world stage in the United Nations and helping to create other kinds of institutions like the BRICS Bank, like the Asian
Development Bank,
and the Infrastructure Investment Bank, along with China. There's a lot happening now, I think, with India and Indian foreign policy on the world stage.
But you have to look at India from the eyes of the people who are poor, who are minorities, and who are Dalit.
There is no question, I do take up this issue, there is no question that India still has many challenges at home. And I think that's part of the reason why it's often hard for people who are unfamiliar with India to think of the country as an emerging major power on the world stage, because India's many domestic challenges are so well known and so visible.
So you went there since in 1990. What made you to go to India? What have you learned from going to India since your first visit in 1990? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I opened this book. I first traveled to India on a college semester abroad program. So
where did you go to college?
I went to Harvard.
Oh,
and, yeah.
Kennedy School of Government?
No, Harvard College.
Harvard College.
Kennedy School is only graduate school.
Correct.
So I did a college semester abroad program. Harvard did not have a semester program in India, so I did this through a program called the School for International Training.
Okay.
And we began in Delhi, and then our program moved to Udaipur, and then I spent 3 weeks in Ahmedabad. Then we all traveled to Surat, and then went back to New Delhi. But that was, if you think about it, the fall of 1990 was a very different time for India. There were political upheavals, if you remember that particular September 1990. There was a lot of protest about the new implementation of the Mandal Commission recommendations, which has actually changed the way Indian society now functions. India is very different now than it was then, but it's a very diverse, complex place where there's always something new to learn.
Diverse and complex place. Has India changed since then, since your first visit?
In many ways. It's changed. I mean, you know this.
It changed for the better?
In many ways it has changed for the better, absolutely. If you look at per capita income, if you look at India's openness to the world, the opportunity for Indian citizens to connect with others, the increase of urbanization, I think broadly these are largely positive trends. That doesn't mean India still doesn't face many problems. It does. I think that's quite obvious.
What about the younger generations of India? To me, they're the best. They're young, they're vibrant, they're resilient, and they're ready to tackle the challenges of the world.
You do see a real energy.
There's a lot of energy there.
And it's a very young country.
It is.
Yeah. My book is about India's foreign policy, so I really focus more on India in international institutions. But it's obviously the case that we see a lot of energy and ambition with India's rising generation saying, we want more from our own country, and we want more on the world stage.
Tell me a little bit about the situation with regard to U.S.-India relationship, where we are, where we headed.
Wow, what a great long story. I think we've got a very good story to tell here in terms of the development of U.S.-India ties, particularly over the course of the last almost 20 years
What do you
now.
think of the 2+2 things that just occurred in New Delhi?
I think this is a good next step. I think we saw the announcement of a good next step in defense ties. I think that's positive. At this point, we do see strategic and defense ties at the leading edge of the U.S.-India relationship. We've got some economic frictions. There's no doubt about that.
What about the tariffs?
Well, this is a real issue. Now, if you would ask me to speak specifically about the Trump administration.
Please do so.
Okay. I do think that one of the things we've seen emerging when the Trump administration came into office, it began clearly following in the footsteps of its predecessor administrations. But we have seen a real change over the course of, let's say, the
Change
last.
for the better?
I think a change for the worse. Let me caveat this by saying
by all means.
I do think defense and strategic ties are continuing to go well. That's very important. But I think the degree to which the president is focused on measuring trade deficits, economic issues as a metric of the health of an overall relationship is creating a whole new source of frictions that weren't there. We already have a lot of trade frictions with India. That's not a surprise. It's been this way for a couple decades, and I think our trade negotiators on both sides should continue trying to find solutions.
Find a common ground?
Yeah, and that's going to be slow.
It's going to be slow.
These trade negotiations don't move quickly. We just saw an announcement in the press today that the Commerce Secretary will be going to India for a trade discussion in December. So that's good. But again, if we have some advances on some issues, there may be other issues that pop up. And so that, I think, creates a challenge. India has been caught up in the 232 national security steel and aluminum tariffs issue.
Right, correct.
This is brand new.
It hasn't really hurt that much to India.
So far, it hasn't really, but it has created a new friction that didn't exist before.
What about the frictions of not buying the oil from Iran?
That is another friction. I think as this unfolds, India, both its private sector companies as well as state-owned enterprises, will have to think about what they do on the issue of reducing procurements from Iran. The issue that I would actually worry about a little bit more, having to do with the United States having pulled out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran deal. The issue I worry about.
You're talking about U.S.-Iran?
Yes.
Yeah.
The issue
nuclear
that,
deal.
Yeah. Well, it's not just the U.S. It's the EU.
Yeah,
it's
it's a global.
it's
Yeah,
a
you're
global.
right. It's a global climate change.
But the issue that I worry about a little bit more is the fact that India has been working to build this port in Chabahar, and that's India's gateway to overland access into Afghanistan because it doesn't have that overland supply route through Pakistan. And so that's something that's been important for India to continue its economic development assistance to Afghanistan. So I think there are questions about whether that port can continue to be a viable development port for India to use and support its own economic work in Afghanistan. I worry about that.
What do you think the relationship between between India and Pakistan? What is it going? What's going to happen? And we have our own challenges working in Pakistan also.
Yeah, those challenges I think are very well documented, and they continue. Not only do they not improve, but in some ways they are getting worse. I think we just saw an election in Pakistan where you had
a new prime minister.
Well, there's a new prime minister, but the election itself was terribly flawed. And at a time when there's a lot of attention on Pakistan about the problem of support for terrorism, there were terrorists actually standing for office as candidates. Pakistan has been put on the Financial Action Task Force gray list for problems of financial flows to designated terrorist organizations. This is not just the U.S. speaking, these are UN designations. So there is a real problem there. On your question about India-Pakistan relations, I don't see any improvement on the horizon. It's hard for me to see. I wish we could wake up one day and there would be some miracle or somebody's found common ground.
And especially that the election is around the corner, and Pakistan has always been a target for them, especially for the BJP and the Hindu nationalist movement. Talk a little bit about freedom of press in India and also in the United States. As you know, the freedom of press is the cornerstone of a democracy. They're the pillar of the nations. And how do you separate the fact from the fictions? And the journalist has been killed in India. They're under attack.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
In India, particularly, we've seen some of the reports about journalists in small-town India facing some real constraints and oftentimes violence. And this has been documented.
This is not good for it's not healthy for the democracy.
It's not healthy for democracy, and it's important, I think, for everybody in India to support freedom of expression.
And freedom of, and human rights, civil rights, women's rights. Those are also important issues as a part of that.
These are all constitutionally protected in India. India has a strong constitution. I think the issue is sometimes living up to the dreams of the Constitution.
And also making sure you implement the rule of law and order.
That's exactly right. It's not always easy, and I think you sometimes find cases of violence. Somebody arrives too late, or there isn't a proper investigation, and this can undermine people's trust and trust in the institutions that are there to try to maintain democracy.
In order for India to be a global beacon of hope for the democracy, they must protect the freedom of press.
Absolutely.
So, and also human rights, the women's rights, as well as civil rights, as well as the minorities' rights.
This is absolutely the case.
They need to make sure they have an inclusive and tolerant society, and it helps shape a better future for India.
In fact, India's diversity has been...
It's a strength, which is a strength for our country also. It brings people together.
It's been one of the reasons...
It makes us stronger.
One of the reasons people look to India as a model
as
of
a model for the
democracy.
diversity.
Yeah.
And we do not want to jeopardize that.
I agree with you. I agree with that.
I want to talk, one of my favorite topics is how the Indian diaspora can help achieve the India's fullest potential. Especially the fact that you mentioned about the younger generation. How do we tap upon those untapped human resources, and also provide some seed money for the capital for the new companies, as well as and also the trade, commerce, and investment, as well as help India in education and healthcare.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that. What's your thoughts?
So actually, I think you're the person who has a lot of thoughts on this topic. This is an area where you have special expertise. I have worked a little bit on this question, but not with the depth that you have. And of course, you've been an important actor on this issue. I think if we look at the role that the Indian American community has played in helping keep India on the radar screen in Washington, that has been a dramatic
It's not
change.
only just the philanthropic part, that politically they have been engaged as well.
That's right.
Individually they have been engaged, socially they have been engaged.
Yes.
And those are
And
important aspects. Right?
very important. And you increasingly now see more Indian Americans running for office.
Yes.
And that is changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
They will
that's
continue to change.
Yeah. You mentioned philanthropy. One of the things that I've seen, and I think it's terrific, is the way that Indian Americans will organize fundraisers to support specific activities, like the work that Pratham does.
Yeah.
Very focused on development.
The Vidya Gala, is that I cannot pronounce some of these names on the foundation. They're doing a great job.
Yes, definitely.
And I'm very encouraged by that. So I call the power of purposeful philanthropy. It's not money. It's not giving money to charity to build a mosque, a church, but it is to make a difference, and also it will have exponential returns.
Capacity building,
You're
those
absolutely
institutions.
Right. Talk a little bit about the relationship between India and Afghanistan. Where are we going? Where we are? They're working right now. As my friend Zalmay Khalilzad just got appointed, who's one of my best friends. To talk about Pakistan and Afghanistan relationship. And what about India and Afghanistan? Afghanistan is important to India.
It's very important. India has become the 5th largest bilateral donor to Afghanistan. I think a lot of Americans aren't focused on that fact.
I agree with you. They're not focused. They don't understand that how much India is helping them.
Yeah. India's support to Afghanistan has been very targeted on economic development. So India has done a lot of infrastructure work. It's built roads. It's built the Afghan parliament. It's built power structures. It's built schools. It has also done some of the soft skills training civil servants from Afghanistan. Indian institutions, Indian NGOs like the Self-Employed Women's Association, the Confederation of Indian Industry, they have also done training for Afghans to help build entrepreneurship or help with skills training in the trades. So you see different facets of the way that India has been active with Afghanistan. India is also politically supportive of the Afghan government. Many Afghans do have long-standing ties to India.
Some of them went to school there.
I was just going to say some of them went to school, and oftentimes,
including, I believe, the previous president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai.
So you do see that kind of connection in the region. You also do see sometimes people from Afghanistan going to India for medical care.
You're absolutely right.
So there are linkages there that I think people aren't always focused on.
And I hope it flourishes.
Yeah.
India has an important role to play in Afghanistan to bringing people together, and also the diaspora community as well.
Definitely.
So thank you very much, Alyssa, for coming, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. This is Frank Islam wishing you a great week. Thank you for watching.